So I hope that you have taken advantage of recordings if you missed other classes, because those 3 classes are the foundation for what we are going to conclude with today. But the first hour of the class will be primarily going through student questions and images. And so that should be no problem. It's the last hour that might be tricky. And if you walk out, I won't be offended. Again, today's class is all about figuring out exactly what you need to do on your property. And there's all the material that I presented to you. You could make a pretty good go at it without getting an assessment, but I strongly recommend that you do, because then it'll be customized from a more comprehensive view. And I haven't told you everything. There are also many references and resources posted on my website. Have you looked at that? Those of you in the classroom? I'm hearing yes. Good. There's tons of information on there, and I try to keep it up to date. It's a little bit rusty right now, but the materials in the class section are pretty good. So just a quick reminder that risk reduction is a coupled approach. You look at the house, its attachments, and the surrounding combustibles, including landscaping materials and vegetation. So as we walk through these case studies, that's what we're going to do. Here's the first question, and if the person who posed the question at some point wants to unmute and correct anything that I say, let me know. It's perfectly fine. And I'll read this out loud in case somebody has trouble seeing the screen. We are in the middle of remodeling. The area I'm concerned about is the existing planter box in dark gray in front of the windows and under the eaves where the red trash can and plywood are resting. I put an arrow in there so that you could see that. I believe that's what the questioner is pointing to. They plan to remove the planter box, and what she wants to know what to put there, as any vegetation will be right under the eaves. Anybody want to venture what she should put there?
Nothing.
The answer was pretty universal. Nothing. That might be a little harsh, but you can put decorative rocks or hardscaping of some sort. And this is the perfect time. I'm so glad this person asked the question, because they're in the middle of a remodel. And this is when you can make sure your windows are double paned, that you do the right thing under your windows. So thank you so much for that question. And this is just to reinforce the answer that I got from all of you, which is the best thing to have within 0 to 5 feet of your home is nothing combustible. If you do choose to plant in that zone, there are some plants that can be there. And let's go back and see if we can see it. The gray area I can't tell what's behind it, but I suspect it's not all concrete. But if it was concrete and you planted some succulents in there that are on the list of fire reluctant plants, you could probably still have some plants in that space, but you'd have to maintain it. So this is the single most important lesson out of this whole class, is the 0 to 5 space. It really, they have proven through science, is the most effective way to minimize pathways to home ignition. Okay, this next question, is the rose bush next to the house a fire reluctant plant? It's a rose bush. And where should it be placed? And if so, replaced? And if so, with what? What would you do first in making this decision? And Zoomies can chime in anytime they want to.
Take it out. Replant it someplace else.
Thanks, Suzanne. Anybody else? The first thing you should look at is the house. Yeah, what are the walls made out of? Are the eaves open? What is the ground siding clearance? Are the windows double paned? Are the vents covered tightly with 1/8 metal mesh screen? And what is attached to the house? So in your opinion right now, or we actually have the person who asked the question, can you answer those questions for us? What is the wall siding made out of? Can you give her the microphone, please?
Laura,
Wood was the answer.
Wood.
Okay. What is the ground to siding clearance? The bottom of the siding to the ground.
I think it's about 46 inches.
Okay, that's marginal, not quite good, but it's better than touching. Are the windows double paned or single pane?
No,
Great, that's fire resistant. I can't see vents here, but on the bottom, but I can see them up at the top. That's called a gable vent. The screening behind it, you may or may not know, but it should be 1/8 inch screening. Do you know, Carol? It is, good. And what is attached to the house? Well, in this perspective, all I can see is there's a wood trellis on one wall. And that's within the 0 to 5 and not a good thing. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is look at the plant. So in the plant list generator, I did a search on all rose species. I don't know what species this one is. I could look it up later on if you want to see if it's specifically named, but in general, there's a lot of genus searches where you can just say, what is the general consensus about how this flammable roses are, for example. So on this screen, you can read what the plant list tells you. It says that some species are highly flammable, some are low flammability, some have intermediate effective heat of combustion, which means basically it's moderately flammable, probably. The local guide, 2 of them, say that hardy roses are fire resistant. We don't know if this is a hardy rose. What is the definition of a hardy rose? So I looked that up. What do you think, Carol?
it's an old rose, one of those little red.
No.
It could be, it's not a fancy rose.
Right. So we don't know for sure if it's, quote, a hardy rose, but it's an old plant, an old-fashioned rose. Hardy roses are supposed to be roses that are from northern climates. I get this information from the internet, and you do with it what you will. The Business of Insurance Institute of Health and Safety claims that it can be planted 5 to 30 feet from the house. A lot of sources don't tell you where you should plant it. They just tell you something about whether it's fire resistant or not. And I am basically abandoning most of those sources because we now know they don't test. There's no standardized testing. And if they don't tell you where to plant it, it's not very reliable information. University of Nevada advises planting only widely separated specimens in the 5 to 30 foot zone. This is FPS is actually a testing laboratory, and they claim it's moderately flammable. Another source evaluated several species and found variability, but all were found to be suitable within 10 feet of structures. And then the Idaho testing lab is always the most conservative, almost always doubling what everybody else says. So I'm giving you this as an example of how complicated it can be to make this decision. What I have done is created essentially an algorithm that looks at the characteristics of the plant, and it automatically generates best practices guide for you. The other thing that I've done is on the lower part of the screen. Let me see if I figured out how to use the laser pointer. Well, you see the home ignition zones in there at the bottom left. There are 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 30, 30 to 100, and 50 to 100. I chose to mark 3 of the zones as being something to consider planting it in, but I didn't mark anything less than 10 feet. And I don't for almost any evergreen plant. I just don't, because evergreen shrubs in general should be planted 10 feet from the house. So with all of this kind of information, Carol, what decision are you going to make?
You called it an evergreen?
It depends. I don't know for sure what this rose is.
Oh, I think I should get rid of it because even if I cut it down to the ground and it regrows, it will regrow very strong.
Close to the window. And that's the most sensitive part. It needs to be 10 feet from the window.
It wouldn't be a big sacrifice. It just might
Yeah. Well, you know, if it's short and small and kept really cut down below a foot tall,
Uh-oh.
that can work. Or you also keep it immaculate at the base, no leaves. The problem with a lot of roses that have thorns is they gather debris. They keep it there. So it'd probably be a good idea to move it. Okay, instead, what would you plant? And I just showed you, I'm showing you a plant list generator report for what I assumed might be her interest in the 0 to 5, because that's where that plant was located. And it's native, and she's interested in natives, I assume. So you could pick something else though. And I generated a plant list, but you're only seeing a fraction of it on here. But I wanted to show you that I provide alternatives for every zone in the plant list generator. You could ask for other characteristics. In this case, I asked, is it deer resistant? Because a lot of people have deer just chomping everything down in this part of the world. Okay, here's another picture. The neighbor's conifer tree is overhanging the compost bins. What should I do? Any ideas? I have someone willing to answer.
I would cut it, but then I'm into cutting everything.
All right, Suzanne, glad you're with us.
To the previous event, to cut it
You
up,
got to put that real close to your
cut it
mouth.
up as high as you feel you can, since the rest of the tree on the side of the fence, and maybe ask the neighbor to cut up from the ground on their side.
Yeah, you're really on the right track there. In this case, it's pretty clear that the person who owns this side of the tree has work to do as well. And that's where I suggest you start with your
Clean up
own.
all the compost, get it contained.
It's really hard with compost to contain it because it needs air and water to break down. But if you had the right kind of screening, it would probably help, and if you kept it wet. But let me just point out that you have the right to remove any vegetation that grows across your property line, but on the property line, which means that the branches would have stobs sticking out. And according to arborists, that doesn't necessarily make the best healthy cut for the tree. So ideally, you would go to the bowl on a conifer tree like this with your neighbor's permission and trim it up. There's some other flammables nearby, but one thing I notice is there's some kind of a deciduous tree with a playhouse in it. Is this conifer tree providing privacy for that? Is that important to the neighbor? And in this case, the preferred solution is to work with your neighbor, right?
I already know that it's a big project and they've been thinking about it for years. Actually,
Okay.
it is a deciduous tree. It's a willow.
The deciduous tree is not the concern, it's the incense cedar next to it. If that was removed, that deciduous tree would probably not be a major issue as long as it didn't start on fire. How's this plant the tree going to start on fire?
Yes.
That fence and the compost bins are ladder fuels. And that once that happens, that tree's going up. That tree house is going down, and probably both neighbors will be affected.
I'm sorry, I don't see the deciduous tree that you were.
Could somebody point to it? Because I don't want to leave here.
There's a platform.
Oh, that's okay.
I don't know what kind of tree it is, but I can tell it's deciduous because it's lost its leaves. Okay, so
I didn't know compost was burnable.
compost is and is not burnable. It depends on how broken down it is, because if there's organics that are dry and can light, it's burnable. The one product I mentioned last week that didn't flame up and travel was a really fine compost because the plant materials were really broken down. But when we start composting, we're putting in things that are pretty fluffy and dry. I know I am. Whoops. Okay, so let me finish up with your neighbors. The best thing is working with your neighbors, and the best way to get them on your side and help motivate them is to be an example yourself and talk to them about what you're going to do on your side and then collaborate. Where there are situations where the neighbor is like, I don't believe you, I don't want to do it, I can't afford it, you should consider putting up a metal fence between you. And I will be showing you examples of that. Okay, the next question was, there's wood stored in that open shed in the back there. What else can I do with my wood? I mentioned this in the last class, but here's the next slide will show you some options. The answer that we always give is that stored lumber and firewood should be 30 feet from buildings and fences. If you can't move it 30 feet away, which many of us can't in these urban environments, what do? Well, you can cover it with a fireproof tarp, the kind that like welders use. You can't light those on fire, extremely expensive, and they're only small. So if you get one of the heavy duty poly tarps, that's better. But the problem is it's extremely hard to secure them, because when winds blowing at 40 miles an hour come through carrying embers, those tarps come off, and you've been drying them out all this time. So tarps aren't the best solution, but it is an alternative. The other is just store it as far away as you can, but not under a conifer tree. And you'll need to regularly remove fine debris that's on it or around it. Try to keep bare ground around it. But realize those 40-mile-an-hour winds are going to be blowing leaves on it during the fire. And then my solution, this is a picture of my lumber and firewood storage shed. I built it with my husband out of metal roofing. And I put 1/8-inch screening in wherever there was any kind of gap. And I want you to notice here the fencing, because you're going to see more about fencing. This is a color fencing in the middle. The shed is called rustic red. On the left is canyon red. And that white fencing where the gate is what's on the other side of that fencing. So you may not want a glaring white fence, but you can paint it. We did, and I'll show you a picture. So what do you think is the answer to this question? I store garden supplies underneath, and I always remove all leaves. Is it okay to store tools under the eaves? What's the first thing you should look at?
What are the eaves made of?
Yes.
And also, is the venting there covered with wire?
Great.
And what's the siding?
Is there anything flammable in what is stored with the tools? I see tools with wooden handles. Those will burn. And perhaps not easily, but they will. And
they're resting on a wooden.
So what's really good about those answers is you're recognizing that the house is first. This is a flammable house. It has open eaves on the left. Suzanne mentioned that the eaves are flammable. I don't see the venting, so I can't look at that in this picture. But I also note underneath the stored goods is a wooden deck. So it is flammable. And right next to the wooden deck are leaves. So the promise to always keep the leaves out is actually probably fairly unrealistic. And then all of the things in the buckets, how flammable are they? Probably most of them will melt or burn unless they're made of metal. And something that, if you can remember, is fertilizers and potting soils burn. What did they use in explosives? Fertilizer. So keeping this kind of material under a window on a wooden platform next to the house is not a good idea. The tools I think she's referring to are these metal wooden handled items. They are not going to cause the house to burn down by themselves. If that was the only thing there, and that was a concrete foundation. Because somebody mentioned that it would probably be hard to ignite them, and that's true, right? So good answer. Just a reminder that open eaves trap air and closed eaves can repel it, and it's better to have fireproof or fire-resistant materials like fiberboard or hardy backer in the closed roof. Okay, next question. What should I do about the old cedar fence with a wood shed at the end? I couldn't really figure out if I had the right picture for this question, but this picture still allows me to answer that question, I think. So what do you think should be done here? Anybody want to try that one?
Break the chain.
Great answer.
So,
Break the chain. And the chain being what?
combustible materials.
Correct. And in this case, the chain that is unbroken is the wooden fence, right? And any embers that are blowing into this are going to land inside this structure. It's an open structure. So the first thing still is look at the structure. And we're going to do that in the next slide, but this is better to talk about fences in. There's stored wood in here. The fence is wood. It's going to be a conduit to carry fire into the shed if the shed area doesn't, not the shed, the over lean-to doesn't start burning before then. This is just a reminder that wood fencing serves as a pathway to structures. Obviously, in the top right corner, a fence moved up. I think the glass is probably broken in those windows, or it nearly is. And somebody got there fast enough to stop the house from getting on fire. You can't count on that in your situation, in anybody's situation. So here's some fencing alternatives. Again, more of what I have in my yard on the middle and the left. We put in wooden framing. You can do that because it's hard to get those big pieces of wood started as long as they're not rotten. And this is the canyon red color. And then if you look on the far left, this is a fence that the neighbor, I said, we're going to put up a wooden fence or a metal fence at no cost to you. What color do you want? And they chose the color on their side with the framing because they thought it broke it up. It wouldn't look solid. And they love it. And I paid for this fence. And it wasn't much more expensive than a wooden fence. It really isn't. And I'll explain where you can get the panels. So we painted that fence this color, and we're going to be reinforcing it and putting plants next to it. But you notice in the middle of that and picture with the tan fence, there's a wooden fence next to it. It's okay to mix and match. I broke the chain. And I partly did this because look at the trees that are above it. He will not cut them down. So I said, okay, this is my defense.
So I put in the metal fence, like the one on the right, and I was wondering if it would be, if it would be really hot for plants and things, but it isn't. My plants have thrived next to that, and the neighbors were, questioning that as well, but it hasn't been an issue even on the really hot days.
Thanks for sharing that. The student said that they put in a corrugated metal fence like the one shown on the right. And she and her neighbors were concerned that it would absorb a lot of heat and cause the plants to suffer that were near it. And she said the plants have actually thrived, that it was not hot, and they've done very well. And the neighbors are enjoying it too.
Thank you.
Okay. There are many kinds of ways to get metal fencing. You can have it wrought iron or slats or whatever. I've been experimenting with this roofing material. You can buy it at Lowe's or Home Depot at fixed lengths, none of them convenient for fencing. So we discovered a source of this metal that you can have cut to length. So if you want a 6-foot fence, you can order 6-foot lengths of all of these different colors, and they're different styles. I brought in a brochure showing it, and if you call them, they'll tell you some kinds of design. They have different kinds of corrugation are a little more expensive than others, but you have a lot of options. I have used chestnut brown, canyon red, and rustic red, and they're all great. It does take a little bit of skill to cut the metal yourself, but they come in 2 or 3 foot wide sections. It's roofing, so they're a little wider, like 37.5 inches wide for the 3 foot, and then they overlap. So you overlap the roofing to get the right width for your fence. Okay.
Quick question.
Yes?
So what would you think of, you know how you have some of that clear plastic roofing people put? Would this work like that also?
No, it would melt.
Oh, okay, got it.
Plastic melts.
No,
It's
I
like-
know that. This is metal. I'm wondering if this would could be a good replacement for that.
Oh, yes. No, it would be a great replacement.
Yeah, okay. Okay, great.
So the question was, there's heavenly bamboo, which is Nandina, next to the house. What should the owner do? First, look at the house. We've already looked at this house once. We know the siding is wood. Here you can see the roof. There is a problem with the roof. The roof is metal, but it's corrugated
Openings.
metal with all these gaps in every single channel. The other problem is the clearance here is definitely not significant. So it needs to be dug down to get the 6 inches of clearance. So after you think about those things, or before, whichever is your choice, then you ask the question about the plant. But let's look, I'm going to go back and review the roof and the clearance situation before we talk about the plant. So on the upper right, you can see where I had a bad roof. That's the kind of roof this is, where there's these holes in it. And then the good roof, I'm sorry I don't have holes to show on it, but essentially they're tongue and groove type panels that hold themselves tight, so it's hard for the embers to travel up those channels. And what you fill it with is this mineral wool. And I did a search online for mineral wool, and it turns out gardeners are often using it for seedling plantings. And it apparently accelerates the growth of plants. If you do a search online, you'll see all these things where you can buy it as a sheet, like for insulation of a roof, but you can also buy it in little cubes. Not very expensive. But again, any holes that are 1/8 of an inch wide should be filled with this material, which is basically a silica-based ceramic kind of material. The ground clearance, we've covered this before. Your walls are going to start rotting in that house I showed you. It's very likely starting to already because it was right up next to it. At least get it down a few inches to keep the rot from occurring, because rot will invite embers to ignite the walls. And all of these other situations where you have inadequate clearance, make sure you do your best to put down non-burnable materials. But remember that if those non-burnable materials on these older homes raise the height of the ground, like they do on the lower right here, it's actually bringing the debris closer to the siding, which is why I always recommend at least choosing pavers so that you don't have to deal with that fine debris in pea gravel. If you try to blow it out, it shoots like a rocket. So where should heavenly bamboo be planted? I'm not going to go over this in as much detail as I did before, but just a reminder that on the plant list generator, you will see that there are hazard ignition zone marks. You're not supposed to edit this database, by the way. You can, you own it once you get it, but all of this information is information that we populate. You'll also notice that there is this list choice, unsuitable, Sharice's list, conflict, or consider. Those are choices you'll find in the plant list generator, and if you pick any one of them, you'll get a different list. But essentially what happens here is that this is a moderately flammable plant. Is generally agreed to. It's extremely common in our area and urban environments. People like it because deer don't like it. It's beautiful, but there's a problem with it.
Flammable.
It may be best to consider an alternative shrub. Firescaping says the berries contain cyanide when ripe and may harm and kill birds. Cedar waxwings are the #1 casualty because of Nandina. And I know we all love other wildlife, so perhaps you should pick another plant, which is what I say in the best practices. Okay, so we're now down to the full case study. How fire resistant is this home? What should you look at? What kind of roof does it have? I heard Class A roof. It's a shingle roof, right? Okay, what else do you see?
What the house is made of, it looks like wood.
Tyson, do you have hardy board siding or wood siding?
It's a hardy, something that's plastic or whatever. It's pretty hard to put a nail into it, so.
Yeah, that's the cement fiber board. That's great. That's fire resistant. What else?
There's a wood fence to the right side.
Okay, we're starting with the house.
Oh, sorry.
Open eaves?
It's hard to tell, but they are open, and we'll see that in other pictures. Good question, good observation. If you start from the top, what else are you looking for?
Gutters?
Gutters, yeah. Are they metal?
Yes.
Do they have leaf litter in them? We can't see from this picture, but in general, the owner is tidy, so I would hope that that's clean. There are some roof valleys, meaning places where the two roofs come together and leaves could collect. But there's some feature about this roof and the vegetation that is good. There's no trees overhanging the roof. So the probability of leaf litter is pretty low. What kind of windows does it have? It's a new enough house that they're probably double pane. Thank you for that answer. And what about combustible materials that you can see within 5 feet?
Bench underneath the window in the entry?
I couldn't really hear you, but you mentioned that there's a table under the window in the entry area. It's a large piece of wood.
Yeah.
So it's not likely to light unless there's something around it, and I can't see that very well, but the good thing is that there's a metal bench there.
It looks like there may be leaf debris against the porch entry.
Yeah, and that wouldn't necessarily matter if it was a slab, because it's not going to burn a concrete slab, but it's still not a good thing to have next to the other materials that could light on fire. If he had a core or a natural doormat in front of his door, the embers and leaves could land on that and start it on fire. And we can't see the door, but if it was a wooden door, it would be more vulnerable. There's one feature here that I did not cover in the class, and I decided to bring up today. There's 2 features. We're going to talk about them now. The garage door is one of them.
Oh.
And the other is visibility of the address. Let's go there now. So one of the things we look at in every assessment, even though it's not necessarily going to save your home, but it does help emergency service providers find your home, is whether the addresses are at least 4 inches tall, 3/8 inches wide on a high contrast background, and visible above parked vehicles and other obstacles. It's important for emergency responders coming from all directions of travel to easily see the address. Let's go back and look at that house. Where is it? If you look really closely, you can find it. Took me several views, but it's under the light on the right side of the garage. And it's not high contrast. It's hard to see. At least it's not under that porch, because a lot of people put their address under those porches, and they're very hard to see. So the place that I recommend that address go and be much more high contrast is above the garage doors. Okay? Now let's look again further at the garage. Now I don't have a close-up of his garage, but garages are vulnerable to ignition due to highly flammable stored items, including vehicles. Garage doors and windows should be closed during high fire danger, and the door weather stripping maintained so that no gap is wider than 1/8 inch wide. I inserted a slide or two on the right that shows a gap at the bottom. The bottom tends to wear out first, and when the rubber wears out, you need to replace it to be able to get that seal. On the side here, I don't think they have good weather stripping, but even if they did, there's a gap of about a half an inch that embers could get through. It's a pretty quick and easy fix to replace your weather stripping around the door, but it's one of those things you have to keep an eye on. It's a maintenance task. Okay, so now you're going to look at this. You know about the house. You know it has Hardy-Backer siding. It has double pane windows, open eaves. What do you think can be done to make this home safer?
Plant
No.
growth on the arbor,
Say that again, Janet?
plant growth on the arbor.
Yeah, look at that vine. Remember what I said about no vines within 10 feet? And it's near a window. I don't know what kind of vine it is, but it's still bad to have vines close to the house. What about below the vine? There's some planting beds within the 0 to 5, right? You know, if they did the opposite, at least, and put their pathway next to the house, and that's how they're hopefully going to start designing things from now on, is put the non-combustible pathway next to the walls of the house instead of the vegetation. So swapping those at least would help. They're wooden. They're probably filled with leaves. At this time of year, that's not a big deal, but during fire season, it could be. What about the middle photo? What do you see?
Wooden gate.
Yep, there's a wooden fence there and a gate attaching to two houses. You're both at risk, both neighbors. I mean, the neighbor and the owner.
I
And-
imagine that the garden hose might be highly flammable as well.
Oh, the garden hose actually will melt. That's probably not a bad thing to have attached to the house, but if nothing underneath it has started melting. And when anything melts, it can flame up and generate intense heat. But that's not the big problem in that situation here.
Attachment of the wood.
Okay, so because I want to make sure we get through this on time, I'm going to point out a few things. You've got this big green evergreen shrub right next to both houses or the fence. Probably a window nearby under open eaves. There's a ladder there, and if you look closely under that shrub, there's a lot of dead material. So what would you do to mitigate that risk if you planted that shrub because your grandmother died and you want to remember her? Well, if you have to keep something really close to the house, you're going to have to at least move it, chop it off about a foot away, shorten the base, take everything away from the base, at least a foot or two if you can, and keep it clean. Ideally, you would also keep it shorter, but there are ways of being able to maintain plants around you if you take these steps to reduce vulnerability. Still an increased risk, but you greatly reduce it. The view on the other slide, the right-hand slide, is just basically in the other direction. So we're going to move on. So what would you do here?
Clean up the bushes under the windows, get them a foot away from the house at least? Or are they flammable, or get them out of there?
Great observation. There's also a vine right here next to the window on the far left. That bush right there, I cannot see very well, but I think it's a lavender.
Yes.
What about the trees in the middle of the view? Those are called rocket fuel.
Right.
And not only are they right here, even though they're separated from the house, when they burn, they are hot enough to burn this house down. And then right next to it are more arborvitae and a fence. So probably if they dealt with these vegetation challenges, they would greatly improve the fire resistance of this home. They've got a paved area and a grass lawn, but these two vegetative situations really increase their risk. We're going to look at that same area, but from another direction. You can see that the shrub there is under a window in the left-hand slide. And on the right slide, you can see that there's actually an arbor with the vine on it right under the window. What else do you see? What's good about this situation? The cobblestone pavers, yeah. The grass is green. What else? No, the eaves are open. You just can't see the shadow. But not only is there a shrub there with the, oh wait, let me go back to the good things. Where the pavers are in the left-hand photo, there's more, and you can see that 6 inches of clearance with the trim above it. That's good. But there's one new feature of the house that we finally get to look at, and that is the foundation vents. So I'm going to give you a reminder about foundation vents. Look at the grassy materials right next to it with that lavender right next to it. If that started burning, all the embers and heat would go under the house. Mostly the risk would be to the siding, but let's look at the vents. Remember this picture? This is typically what you see when people are blowing their yard clean. It blows all the junk into those holes. I could not see any cover over the foundation vents from the outside. And on the inside, I couldn't tell if they were 1/8 inch or not. And remember I said you should have both so that you can prevent rats from getting in as well. Rats can't chew through 1/4 inch, but they do through 1/8 inch mesh. Okay, so here is the other side of the house. And what do you think the homeowner should do to reduce vulnerabilities? Well, we've talked about several of these things so far. The 0 to 5 has definitely got flammables in it. We don't know what species of plant that is. I believe it's a camellia. Tyson, do you know?
I believe that it is, yes.
Okay. You notice that the pathway goes through the middle instead of being near the house to keep that 0 to 5 clear. There's all these leaves underneath the shrub, and I can't really see the clearance to the wall, but it's definitely under the eaves. And looking the other way on the right side, you see all this cloth on the ground, weed cloth. That's flammable. And next to that is a wooden fence, very close to the neighbors. It's probably, I don't know, 12 feet between them. And there's possibly a grill right here with a tank in it. So I'm just trying to point out things that I see not knowing the home. So here's the last picture of this house. And I think when I look at the plant buds on this, it verifies it's camellia. So we're going to look at camellias sometime in the future to see if they're flammable or not. What else do you see here?
About the garbage cans in the water tank.
Okay, the question was, what about the garbage cans and the rainwater bin? I'm assuming that's what that is, rather than a gasoline bin.
That's water.
The water container's fine. It would be very hard to burn that because it's full of water, right? And it's cooling. But the garbage containers are under the eaves within 5 feet of the house. At a minimum, I'd swap them over to the wood side. But another way to mitigate that risk is make sure they can be latched closed so that if they fall over in the wind, they don't open up and spill on the ground your combustibles. And that goes with yard waste and regular waste. And if you're recycling paper in your recycling bin, for that as well. This is a really great view of his fence and gate situation. And at a minimum, my suggestion that they replace the first section of the fence next to the house with these panels would be cheap and easy to do, and it would break the link. The further over they did, the better. But at a minimum, clearing out, I think those are 6-inch slats, making about 1.5 feet wide non-combustible fence there would be a really good idea. So this is just a reminder that all these other burnables around your home are something that you can easily move, I hope, or get rid of. But I'm not asking you to destroy your quality of life. It's really important to be able to sit outside on comfy cushions and enjoy the weather. But just bring them inside when it's high fire danger. And don't leave your garbage bins open. Don't store firewood next to the house. So creating a safer home is definitely possible. At least once a year, do a meticulous inspection of your home and outbuildings. It doesn't cost much to do this. And this slide here shows some, like an inspection suggestion form graphic from Stephen Quarles. What about the combustibles under the deck? We're not talking about decks today. It's really weird because decks are usually the biggest problem I encounter, but nobody brought up any pictures of decks. Any case, nothing under decks. Move your firewood away. Maintain your roof covering in good condition, Class A covering. Remove debris from your roof and gutters. How often?
Whenever it needs it.
Whenever it needs it. Good answer. It's at a minimum twice a year, but if you have trees over it and you're in a highly dangerous neighborhood, it should be monthly during fire season. Make sure the eave area can resist ember and anticipated flame exposure. Modify near home vegetation as necessary. It's largely what we've been talking about today. Develop a vegetation management plan and maintain selected plants and vegetation with adequate irrigation and removal of dead materials. If you got the 0 to 5 clean and you did these things, your house stands a much better chance of surviving. You didn't mention the vents. Hopefully you would have done that. This is just a maintenance thing.
I have a question that I just thought of when I was wandering around my house looking at the vents. And that is that our vents have a vent well around them so that the vent is actually below ground level or almost below ground level, and it's protected. And that seems to be a place where a lot of leaves collect. And I was wondering if we were going to do 8-inch screening, is there a good way that you could put it along the outside so it would both keep the embers and the leaves out?
That's an excellent question. I'm going to repeat it just in case people didn't hear. She has a situation where her vents, her foundation vents, are protected by a metal shield that's a couple inches away from the wall so air can still get in. And the vent screen is probably 1/4 inch, and inside of that hole, leaves are collecting. That is a constant problem. Part of the problem is they should not have buried your vents. But Lucille, who's in this room helping with the microphone, and I went to a house 2 days ago where they tried to put screening on top of those metal structures to keep rats and debris out. And they just came off. They were warping. They did not work. And you've got to make sure it's secure to make it work. It could, but it's tricky because they have a rounded shape and you'd have to figure out how to connect the screen to metal. You'd have to screw it in. And then you'd also have to screw it in at the top to the concrete with some concrete screws, cement screws. So it is a solution. But it takes a little more work. And at a minimum, keep those holes clean regularly. And if you feel like you just cannot handle getting that screen on top of the outer section, at least get the 2 screens in the crawl space under it. Does that answer your questions? Okay, we're going to have a break now for 5 minutes. Let me finish this slide off. Just remember that if you live in Ashland, you can ask for a wildfire risk assessment. My business cards are on the table there. You can write to me an email. Everybody has my email because I've been sending it to you weekly. My phone number is on there. and you can call me up and I can get you on the waiting list. It's taking some time right now because we're going through a transition. You should probably expect 1 to 2 month wait, although I'm hoping to really re-engage now that this class is over. And if you want me to do it, you'll have to tell me or the person that you call or go online and fill out the form. But there are other assessors. You might get a different perspective that way. This is a reminder that if you don't live in Ashland, contact your fire district or your municipality. They usually have at least one person who does risk assessments, and they will not go into the detail that we do. But you have that option. And for people in my classes that don't live in Ashland and I can do it unofficially, I will go and do it at your house. Okay, now 5-minute break, and then we're going to move into the plant list generator. So anybody who doesn't have a computer or doesn't want to watch this is free to leave. Oops. And we will come back just after 2 o'clock. We're going to get started again. And I hope this works. I'm going to be flipping back and forth and I might have some technical difficulties, but I want to inspire you to go after this tool because it's incredible. Really, it is. I mentioned this just before the break that if you want to be kept informed of updates, whether you go to the library or download it on your own computer, you need to sign up to be notified when we do updates. Otherwise, you're going to be using an older version and it will miss a lot of information that could be at your fingertips. So my plan for how to approach this, and I haven't done it before, so I might be a little awkward, is there are basically 5 steps to teach you on how to use the plant list generator. I'm going to go through the steps on screen like this, and then I'm going to try to actually go to the plant list generator and demonstrate what I just said. So if you go to the plant list generator on livingwithfire.org, you will see a screen. I will show it to you a little bit. No, I won't show it to you because I can't go online right now. It would really screw me up. And it'll tell you how to do a download. You have to download, it's an Excel file that runs macros. You have to download it to someplace on your computer to run it. You can't just do it like you're online and automatically run it. It won't work. It has to be on your computer to run. So you have to have a place that you put it. It won't work on Macs unless the Mac has been modified to run in Excel with macros, and that costs extra money. It's harder to do. It's available. I just don't know how to do it. It doesn't seem to run on tablets or iPads. You need to basically have the Microsoft Suite and run it on a laptop of some sort. It's not a huge file. It's not going to take up a lot of memory. So one of the first things that will happen once you download it is basically it will ask you whether you want to enable the generator to run. It's a security warning. No problem. It's not going to blow up, put a virus or anything like that on your computer, but you just say enable it. And then the first screen that usually shows up is the introduction. And the second screen is spreadsheet tab, which I will show you, is the instructions. The instructions look intimidating, but once you use it a couple of times, it's so easy to use. So if you're going to go to the library, it was checked out at the Ashland and Medford Library. They have PCs that run Windows and Excel available for patrons. We don't know about the other library locations, so you should call first. And once you are there, if you've got some kind of a jump drive so you can copy down the plant lists onto your jump drive, you will be able to take them home with you. Otherwise, you have to print them out. So I don't know if you can print them out at the library. I don't think so. So you're going to generate plant lists, copy them onto your thumb drive, and go home and print. Because they'll be printed in either Excel or Word. And most people can run Word. So you might want to choose that. So read the intro and instructions. The first page that comes up will be this introduction. You don't have to read that. It's just about like how this thing came about. But it does have disclaimers and things like that because I basically mined a lot of resources and and information from people, and whatever they said is what they said. I can't verify or guarantee anything. So the disclaimer is in there. The next is a quick start guide, the instructions. And what I'm emphasizing in this, it's actually much longer. It talks about the steps, is that probably the most important part of the plant list generator, if you're interested in flammability, is the choice of ignition zones. You now know why that's important. And these are two examples of how they might appear to you. The one on the left is how it appears to you if you are doing a filter function. We're going to run through that. And the second is what it looks like in text, actually in the database for a plant. This is more of the instructions to help you do it right. If you pick everything under the sun, you'll end up getting 0 plants on your list. So it tries to help you figure out what is important to pick. Filtering instructions. And then the third tab or spreadsheet is the master. That's where the generator actually lives. You don't have to be on it to run the generator. I'm gonna go back here. You can see on the quick start guide, the second one, it also has a blue button called Generate Filtered Plant List. You can run it from there, but I just live on the master because this is where you can also look for individual plants and see more details than you can get in the list. And when I get onto the database, I will show you how much more information is available on every plant. There's the disclaimer. The key button is this blue Generate Plant List button, and it starts the generator process. I'm only showing this slide because at the bottom, the introduction is spreadsheet number 1. The instructions are spreadsheet number 2. The master is in the middle. Key terms, definitions are the 4th. And the last one is where I got information. So if you see all these codes like FPS, IBHS, it actually goes to those sources and tells you what the link is and what I might have done in the notes from that source. And there's a lot more you could research on your own there. Okay, so now I am going to stop sharing this, or let me see if I have to do that. Okay, so I'm not going to go online and download it. Like I said, you can see the instructions to do that. But when you download it, it will come up looking like this, although the page will be longer, which is that first spreadsheet, the introduction. So at the bottom, you see the spreadsheets. I just clicked on from introduction to instructions. There's the quick start guide. Now I'm going to click on the master, and there's the database. Real quick, the key terms are just definitions if you want to look at that. Source information, that's what it looks like. Now I'm assuming, Tyson, that everybody is seeing me switch screens. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. This database, I'm going to scroll across it. Some columns are hidden. There's the Generate Filtered Plant List. The blue button is the key. You'll see that it starts out with the genus, species, subvariety, varieties, species, common name, garden facts, and photo links. And I am going to see if this works. There are a lot of links. And it took me to this fire testing source where I got the information from at least one source on fire. And you can see all these things about it. I don't particularly like a lot of what they say. I find it very confusing because what is the difference between a landscaping zone and a fire-wise rating? They're very confusing. I've done my best to come up with a standardized approach, but they show you more information about the species, and they have a function where you can, hopefully this will show up, you can look by common and scientific name and scroll down the list.
So much information.
Basically, what I did when I started this out was discover these resources and mine them all to put them into one place. But there's more out there. I didn't include every plant on this list. This is developed in the East. in Virginia, I think. Okay, so I am going to close that down. And we're back to the plant list generator. You can see here, this is Abelia. It's a fairly common plant people plant as an ornamental. It talks about how it's got multiple kinds of flammability. These are the zones that I've basically said, okay, you can consider it, but see that one there means consider. Sometimes I say, you know, I'm just too questionable. I question what they say. I'm not even going to give it a consider. But the way this list choice works is if it's unsuitable in my opinion or others' opinions, just like totally bad, it goes unsuitable. I'll click that and I won't let it go necessarily into consider. Then Sharice's list. I didn't put it in my list because I don't feel like it's a really great choice. If there's conflict in what people report, that's the next column over to the right, and then consider. Most of the plants, a large majority are put in consider, but the consider is with a caveat that you beware and you read the comments and the best practices to reduce risk. So the rest of the database has basically got marks in it that say something about the plant and who said what or who gave me information is marked here. And there are codes in the source information. How tall does it grow? Well, you can actually ask that in the plant list generator. You only want to pick plants that grow 2 feet tall, things like that. So this is what the generator uses to create plant lists. Does it bloom in the spring? What does it smell like if it has a fragrance? What flower color is it? Right now, not all of these are something you can select for because I didn't feel that I had enough information to feel confident that you should select for them, but the information is there based on what I did find. Hardiness zones are particularly problematic because now we're talking about heat zones instead, and there's a lot of difference of opinions between sunset zones and hardiness zones, but I put it in there. What kind of light does it need? What kind of water does it need? The term drought tolerant is a term I don't like. I prefer water need, but a lot of people think in terms of drought tolerance, and it's actually a very complicated term. And there are 3 characteristics of drought that do not get adequately addressed when somebody says it's drought tolerant. How easy is it to grow? Some places like Calscape and Oregon Flora will tell you it's easy or not. What nurseries carry the plant? That's not been populated yet because I haven't gone to the nurseries to find out. What kind of use is there for it? Hedgerows, screens, can it be used for erosion control according to somebody? Remember, these are not my opinions. These are other people's opinions. Is it native? Is it native in California, Oregon, Southern Oregon? Has it naturalized? Is it invasive? How invasive? Does it invade wetlands? What are the wildlife benefits? Is it a pollinator host, plant food, a host or a food source? Does it shelter birds? Is it bird food? Does it shelter bats or serve bats? I actually have 5 plants in here that do. Other wildlife, deer, bear, whatever. If somebody said that it did that, it goes in. And how deer resistant is it? Some very high or very high. And then there's this category for the advanced user that basically says, what is its total value? The higher the number, the value count, the more valuable it is relative to all multiple objectives. And I don't usually teach this, so you can ignore it for now because it takes a sophisticated user. Anyway, that's a quick tour. I'm going to stop sharing. So we just took a quick tour. Now we're going to go into step 4, which is to select filters to limit the list to a subset of plants. And you do this by looking at some of these things I've gone over and introduced you to already. You can ignore any one of these. You can just say, I want to know whether it's a high water user. But because this was designed to help you make choices about flammability, I highly encourage you to make at least one choice about flammability. So this is the filter. Step 4 is to select what you want to limit the search on. In this case, you wanted to look at flammability and what hazard zone, 10 to 30, on the consider list. I just was reminding folks that flammability and risk reduction notes are the most important part. Here's an example at the bottom of the filter page that shows Oregon native plants suited to the 0 to 5. It found 9. And this is what the filter page looks like. In the first function of the generator, you have to select key attributes. Are you seeing this slide?
Yes.
Okay, so at the top is the home ignition zone. You see I picked 0 to 5.
Yeah.
List choice, Sharice's list, if you go down that column. Now go over to the middle column at the bottom, nativeness. Is it native to Oregon or California? You can pick one or the other, or both. And at the very bottom, notice it says it found 26 matching plants. You can try other combinations. Are you seeing this lovely Ribes sanguinea picture?
Yes.
Okay, so Oregon natives suited to plant in the 10 to 30 foot hazard ignition zone. It found 96. So the beauty of this tool is you can search on any number of combinations to generate whatever you want. You don't have to go to a book and say, be limited. Here's one where I did a search for natives that are deer resistant with very low water needs. So I just wanted to give you some ideas about what you can look for. So now we're going to go back to the plant list generator and demo the first filter. Okay, so I hit the generate filtered plant list. It comes up with the welcome to the plant list generator and tells you there's 2 screens. You just type OK. Notice I haven't selected anything except Sharice's list. You see that on the far right? And at the bottom it says 312 matching plants found. But there's nothing else. So what do we want to look for? Well, I'm kind of staying with this theme of the 0 to 5. So I'm going to say home ignition zone 0 to 5. You see how I clicked that button there? What else do you want to know about? And look at the bottom, it only showed 50 matching plants now.
Watering requirements.
So I'm going to go with low. Actually, we can look at water needs no matter what when we print it out. So let's go with something that we select very specifically to limit the size of this list.
Ground cover.
Ground cover. It went down to 33 plants. You see that at the bottom? Okay, so then I go to the next page. And this is a list. I'm going to skip going back to my slides. Hopefully, if you're not confused, or if you're confused, I will go back to them because it shows things bigger. But this is the select what you want to see in the report filter, the second filter. So in the report, because we already have the home ignition zone selected, I'm taking that off.
Can't really take it off. Sure.
What? Oh, it will show up no matter what?
It doesn't want you to take it off.
It won't let me take it off. Okay, so but let's look at the water need. Remember you said you wanted to see that? Plant structure, we already picked graminoids, so I'm turning that off. How about we also ask it for what the wildlife benefits are? So in the report, it will reveal these things. Now, the one that I show you, if we go back to the slides, won't be this combination. But so then I press at the bottom the next button. And can you see that it popped up with another menu? View as an Excel spreadsheet or a Word document.
Yeah.
Or PDF. I don't ever use that, but you can. Or go back and say, you know, I don't want to do that. I want to quit and start over. You can do that too. You can go backward or forward. Let's say we're going to do it as an Excel file. It takes a little bit of processing time. And then it's general. So what's important to see here is that what I picked on the first screen was the ignition zone is 0 to 5. It's on Sharice's list, and these are ground covers that are acceptable for that zone. So the first plant that shows up, I'm hearing,
I think I'm gonna have to work on that, maybe that was.
who's cricketing?
There's a bird outside. It's a bird outside.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, good, because we have benefits for wildlife in here. So it goes in alphabetical order by scientific name. If you're looking for common names, you'll have to look at that the common name column. On water needs, you can see that the first one has no water needs or benefit information because I couldn't find it for that species. And if anybody ever wants to help me out, I can use help filling in these blanks. And so if you run down this list, let's see how many plants are on this list. It says at the top there are 33 plants that you could decide to pick from. But what's missing from this list, and I want to go back, is the flammability information, right? I didn't pick that. That was a mistake. It would be much whiter if I did. So I am going to have to stop sharing screen again. Okay, so I said, oh, I messed up that list. I want to go back to the previous form. And instead of home ignition zone, which is what I didn't want, Walt, I wanted flammability notes and risk reduction notes. And those are generally what you should have on all the time. Next. This time I'm going to view it as a Word document. I prefer the Word just because it's neater, but you can see now, instead of having blanks on flammability, they appear, along with everything else that I had originally selected on. And if we run down this list, you can see, well, which one of these do I know and like? The Delospermas are good. On Sharice's list, there are fewer of these to pick from than on the consider list. It probably would have been twice as long on consider. These are the ones that I like the most because I think that overall they have most consistent information that is likely to be reliable. And you can say, you know, I should get this. Like here's, I'll start with the fragarias here. So the strawberries are generally considered a really great choice as a ground cover, even in the 0 to 5. But there's a quality of their form that makes them risky. And that is they act like a net. They catch debris. So you have more increased risk. They also spread. You're going to have to make sure they don't spread to the siding, the edge of the house. I don't have that really well captured here, but I do say that
Looks like you've got it on the top one on the right.
yeah, I say keep it free of dead materials and burnable mulches debris are removed. You're in the 0 to 5. So the algorithm that I've written will basically tell you what is on average the best thing to do for these plants. And you can see it gets kind of repeated, might be variations, small variations, but in general, they're all about the same. So what I just did was walk you through step 5. Just quick revisit on these slides here. There's all these choices of attributes that you can select. We did this. Anybody have any questions so far on this part of it? Okay. And we went through this one where we selected the output reports. I just want to remind everyone that when you're doing a 2-filter system, you pick the things that you just want to search for, limit them in the first screen, which zone, which source to consider, and organ natives. But you could have picked anything else. In our case, we picked ground cover as well, and didn't pick organ natives, I don't think. But there's any number of combinations. Generally, I suggest that you limit it to 3 or 4. And then if you want to see whether those plants have other characteristics or attributes, you could do that by doing the report output. And this is what we were looking at. In the first example, I picked organ native plants on Sharice's list to plant in the 0 to 5. Wildlife benefits and deer resistance, at least before class. But I also picked flammability notes and risk reduction notes. So I am going to spend the rest of the class doing any searches that you are interested in. And hopefully that will help you figure out whether you want to use this tool or not. One of the things that I discovered when I was looking at Tyson's home is that I didn't know if that was a camellia or a rhododendron, but I wanted to know how flammable they are, and I didn't want to generate a plant list. So the reverse is, what about the plant? And I want to go the other direction. Well, we're actually working on a reverse search function, but we couldn't get it done by today. So I'm going to show you how to find and select for individual plants using the database itself. And we're going to start with camellias. So in the quick start menu with instructions, it tells you how to do this, how to search for a single species or genus of interest. And like I said, we're trying to revise it so that you could actually enter a list of species and say, I want to know how flammable these species are, plus everything else. It's just not available yet in the database that we will publish, hopefully at the end of this month. It will be. When you're in Excel, if you're an Excel user, you will know the find and select function, or Alt-F, is how you search for something by a word combination or symbol.
Control F.
Control F, yes. And I pulled this up earlier to get the Nandina information, for example. I did a find function and I looked for a Nandina, then I hit the find next, and it went down the list to that location. And everything that I scrolled across the screen to show you about that plant, you could then look at. So we're back to the plant list generator. And I'm going to show you how to do a search function for camellia. And all you have to do is just be anywhere, and I'm going to use the Control F function, and it popped up. Can they see this, you think? Can you see the find and replace?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm going to do something on purpose here, so don't freak out. I'm purposefully misspelling camellia. And if this happens to you, it's often because you misspelled it. It is very particular that you get absolutely correct spellings. Okay? And I have been able to find that sometimes I misspell them in the database, and you think, oh, Sharice didn't get that one. Well, it's possible, but there's a lot of times when it's just error. And I have been studying these plant lists and other resources, and I haven't found a single one that hasn't had an error. One letter or something. So I am looking for camellia, and it went pop down. Did you see it popped right down to that plant? So I'm going to close this down so I can see my full screen. Oops. And the two species that I found and did research on were senescence and japonica. Remember that fire performance plant selector I popped up earlier? I could go look at that right now too, because I provided the link for it. And what do the flammability notes say? It's kind of long. So a local publication called Fire Resistant Shrubs and Trees for Privacy, OSU, that's what OSU 212 means, says it's fire resistant. They don't ever say how they've made that determination. Tests indicate that camellias have low flammability. One test indicates that C. japonica has very low flammability. That came from Safer Gardens. Two sources claim this species is fire resistant, but they did not prescribe a suitable HIZ. One source evaluated 3 related species and found that they were all at risk, meaning that they had higher flammability and unsuitable for planting within 30 feet of structures. You see right now how much variability in that? IFAS, which is a Florida testing facility, says C. japonica has low flammability, so it can be planted within 6 feet of structures. All species are prolific bloomers, but Firescaping, which is the book that Carol's looking at, says no pollinators use the plant and it can be messy. Lots of dropping of spent blooms or unopened buds. Because it doesn't support pollinators, they advise planting a native flowering shrub instead. Prune right after blooming or during summer and fall. Remove dead or weak wood and thin when growth is so dense that flowers fail to open properly. So sometimes I don't just talk about flammability, I talk about other issues like I did about the cedar waxwings and Nandina. So what's the best practice for camellias? Plant at least 10 feet away from buildings. Do not grow flammable plants under this plant. On flat ground, space 2 times the mature height of the plant, increasing spacing distance on slopes. Prune base branches up to 1 to 6 feet. And the reason, remember, this is an algorithm that is generic. So if the plant is 6 feet tall, you're not going to prune it up at 6 feet. You're going to prune it up something reasonable. Only grow on burnable mulches that are 10 or more feet from the building, and remove dead and fine debris often. A plant that has waxy leaves, contains volatile chemicals, or retains dead material can burn intensely and explosively. Avoid placing burnable mulch under the plant and remove other plants growing under it. If planted within 30 feet of a building, isolate it or replace with a less flammable plant. So I have taught you for 3 weeks why that's important to do those things. And now hopefully you would understand why those recommendations are made. Okay, so what questions do you have about a plant or plant lists? It's your time. And if any Zoomies want to volunteer, I will come to you next. I'll take the first one from the classroom.
I have a question. It tells you to look at the mature growth before you plant and all of that. My experience has been that mature growth is so variable in how do you make that determination of what's really out there? I mean,
I don't know the answer to that about mature growth. All I know is that at this point, most of the time people don't consider mature size. And so I put down what it is reasonable for mature size relative to the hazard ignition zone. So for example, a tree that grows 30 feet wide, and it says that in the literature, but around here it only grows 10 feet wide, you just have to use local knowledge to decide where to plant that. But based on what I can see in the nursery guides or other guides, 30-foot wide tree, at least the base of it, should be planted so that when the tree reaches maturity, it's 10 feet from the house. So where does that put you? 25 feet away for the base. Those are just rules of thumb, guideline, because every place in the world is different and the growing conditions are different. So it's not something that you can be easily cleared up. That make sense?
well, it makes sense. It doesn't make it any easier.
I'm sorry. Plants and fire are complicated. So Zoomies, does anybody want to ask something? Oh, and by the way, Tyson is teaching here in less than an hour, so he is not able to be your host at the moment. So I will try to find out. If you raise your hand, I will see you.
Well, there's a question in the box that says, search for an evergreen that is a good landscape screen 30 feet from the house.
Okay, let's do that. Thank you for the question. Generate plant list. So I am going to select on 30 to 100. I'm not going to select on Sharice's list, just consider. I'm not going to do ground cover, and we're not particularly sensitive to plant structure, though we could be when we do the printout. Your interest is what can I plant at 30 to 100 feet? And I don't know if the privacy screen is on here. Hedge or screen, see that right there? I just collected under utility.
Huh.
And 176 plants showed up,
They say evergreen.
but they said evergreen. So I'm going to go and click evergreen, and it goes down to 82. Does everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Next, we don't need wildlife benefits, water needs, unless you want to add those in. But I want to know what kind of structure is it? A tree or a shrub? What else do you want to know?
Maybe height, if it's gonna be a screen, you might wanna know the height it's gonna be.
I'd have to do that on the prior list, I think.
No, it's right there,
Where?
right below plant structure.
Oh, height. How big does it grow?
And I guess some of these fields might not be completely populated, right, just because
Correct.
it's hard to find it.
So Walter was saying that some of these are blank on height because I didn't get the information on it from anybody. Okay, so I'm now, and you notice how these filters are piled on top of each other. You just have to live with it. But we're going to go next. View as a Word document. Okay. So you can see what happened on the first screen in red up here. The home ignition zone, 30 to 100, because you want to know what could be planted within 30 feet from the house. And if you had said 10, this list would be pretty small, because hedges within 10 feet of a house is not a great thing. So I actually like your question quite a bit. Hedge or screen. So these plants here, how many were there? Said 82. We're not going to go through all of them, but if you want me to, I will slowly scroll down the list, or you can ask if a certain plant is on it. The person who posed that question, do they want to look for a specific species?
So Laura said Podocarpus.
Borocarpus?
Podocarpus?
PH?
Podo.
I wanna do the control.
That's a tree, Podocarpus.
I'm having trouble hearing what she's saying. Okay, so I'm searching for, spell it?
Podocarpus.
Oh.
Podo. Yeah,
Look,
there.
it jumped right down to it.
Highly flammable.
I'm sorry, it didn't stay there.
Oh, because you have to click in there, now you can close that box.
Okay, so because we're beyond 30 feet, there are a lot more plants coming up. Now, if you want to change this to a more sensitive filter, like within 10 feet, we can go back and do that. It says it grows to 30 feet high. Let's see. High, yeah.
They're big trees. They're popular in Southern California.
They're also highly flammable.
Yep.
It says right there.
Okay, so we got the whole screen here. So there you go. And if you wanted this list to look at all your options, 30 feet from the house. If you wanted to limit it to natives, you could go back and do that, because 82 is a lot of plants to look at.
I have two giant sequoia trees in my backyard. They are in the far corner, more than 30 feet from the house, but they're a gazillion feet tall. So other than putting them up, and they're right up against the fence, any suggestions?
Okay, well, as a former chief of natural resources at Sequoia Kings Canyon National Park, I know how big those trees get. I was responsible for the biggest trees in the world.
It's too close to the house.
So is it sequoia dendron? And I could have looked for the common name as well, but I tend to think in scientific names. So I went straight to the tree. I didn't try to generate a list. And you can look and see how flammable it is from that one source. I have suggested that it be planted at least 50 feet away.
Well, remember, because it's.
So, you know, this is like an ideal. And what do you do with real life? I understand that. I am working with the city of Ashland for all new plantings, a new code ordinance that will actually specify the distance planting requirements for all really bad plants that are flammable. Hopefully we'll release that before spring, but it has to go through a review process. In any case, since these trees could be 30 feet in diameter when they mature, they grow very quickly in their first 125 years, very tall. They are flammable, so I wouldn't get the weeping kind like they have some varieties. The branches hang all the way down to the ground. But if you've got them already, what can you do? We know that they're flammable. Let's look at the best practices. Shoot. It could be sensitive to the mouse. This is, again, a generic response for all of the trees. Based on mature size, at least 150 feet tall, avoid planting within 60 feet of structures. That's my advice. The best practice is to make sure that at least, it says 6 feet, but a minimum of 10 feet of the crown is away from buildings, and 10 feet above the roof. Those are minimums. Tree crowns are spaced 10 feet apart. Increase spacing on slopes. Remove dead and fine debris often. Plants with needles or thin, fine, flammable leaves should not be used for a hedge. So don't use it as a hedge if you can avoid it. Plant at least 10 feet from buildings. A plant that has, this is all stuff that's just warning you that you got a vulnerability here. But the bottom line that I would tell you is prune it up as high as you can and clean up the branch and leaf litter periodically, because it's not as bad as coastal redwood and shedding debris, but it can be quite bad.
So until the ground is bare underneath?
No, I'm not saying strip all the material bare underneath it because it's bad for the tree. But I'm saying that it can collect a lot of litter because of its size.
Right, now there's a steep spot just behind the tree, so of course that's full of pine needles. So is that something that you clean it out until that area is clean of any debris?
The question was, since I can't visualize it, I don't have a picture, it's hard for me to respond, but how much do you basically need to clean out areas underneath the tree? In general, I would not clean under the drip line because it needs that moisture, that retention of moisture through its overlying mulch, natural mulch. But it can become so extreme because, you know, it's a fire adapted species that used to burn fairly frequently. Periodically, it all gets cleared off anyway, naturally, but I wouldn't do it all the time. If you have a slope below the tree, it depends on what's growing on that slope. at a minimum, that 10-foot spacing between crowns, full crowns. The next tree would be 10 feet away, full crown. On a slope, you would want to double that distance. If it's low-growing grassy-like plants, it's probably not that big of a deal. This is the way I look at everybody's home. When I go on site, I expect it to burn. So I look at what will happen when a surface fire moves across your land. Is it going to move on those grasses up to your debris under the tree? No problem. Why? The tree's not going to burn. It's got thick bark. It's going to burn the debris under it, and it's not going to generate enough heat to kill the tree or start it on fire. I cannot talk about generally other things around it because I can't see it. But that's the basic principle, is believe that your property will burn, and how can you stop it from becoming a problem for things you care about. And with that, I think we're about done. Oh, wait, one more question.
Just, do you, is there a password to access this?
No, there is no password to access livingwithfire.org, my website, and to download this database. Once you download it, it's on your computer, and what you do with it is yours. We do have some hidden areas in it because we don't want you messing with it and making it like it won't run. If you do that, though, guess what? Delete it and download it again. So it's about 3 o'clock, 2 minutes from it. Anybody want to give me any feedback?
Thank you. Yes.
Invaluable. Thank you so much.
Okay, again, I made an offer online that if you really want to use the plantless generator and you're having difficulty with it, please email me and I will ask my husband to fix your problem.
One comment. That is, I can't walk around our neighborhood now without looking at everybody's landscaping and thinking what they should do. If I'm going to do it, they need to do it too, and they're not.
If you didn't hear that, this is exactly what happens. I ruin it for you. If you're an ecologist, it's very hard for me to walk around or to drive around the country and I say, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. If I'm a fire person, I see all this stuff. You still have to be optimistic because we can do something about the risk of wildfire in our communities, but it does take a village. And it's one person at a time. And I'm so grateful that you're here with this interest. Please pass on the messages I have given you. We will get there eventually, but we do have to try to, just like with adapting to climate change, speed it up a little.
Thank you.
Thank you.